Welcome back to Chapter 3, Internal CSS, Part 3. The essential outcomes for this chapter: you will be able to manipulate the physical design of a web page by utilizing CSS internal styling, by adding universal selectors to your web page, styling the box model for CSS, creating ID selectors, image tag selectors, and class selectors. And you will be able to connect key terms in the chapter with the application. Learning the order to CSS. You have learned to group your selectors in the same area and apply order to them by value name. The order you have learned is as follows. 1, you have first put in the body selector. Second, the header selector, including the H2 selector, which follows the header selector. The nav selector, which after the nav selector follows the ULI group selectors. And then you have the div selectors, which are all grouped together in order of value name. Then you have image selectors, which are all grouped together in order of value name, followed by the footer selector, which is usually put at the bottom, right above the closing style tag. Learning the order. Learning the order is important. Why? Not because there is a universal law in CSS that demands you follow this particular order. Rather, it is so that you have structure and you can find selectors easily, especially when you add another image, another H1 tag, or another div section. It is also easier if you need assistance. It will be easier for the person helping you figure out your error. It is now time to begin to look at the other HTML tags that we have not yet styled. That would be our paragraph tags, our block quote tags, our quote tags, and the heading tags. Back to the other selectors now. Holding off on the paragraph, block quote, button, quotation, and the H1 through 6 selectors was intentional. You know that if you create a selector, it will apply to all selectors in the body section. So when you are adding styling to the paragraph tag, it will apply to all of them. So what happens if you have 5 paragraphs in a document and you want 2 of them to be styled differently? In these types of situations, you would use class selectors. The world of class selectors. A class selector is used when you want to apply the same CS styling to a variety or multiple selectors at the same time. The symbol for a class selector is the period. Like the ID selector, all class selectors up in the head section start with a period. Paragraph selectors will be the first one we are going to talk about. First, I need to put styling in for all of my paragraphs. Since the paragraph tag is connected to the div tags, I will place the paragraph selector following the last div for ID selector up in the style section. If you notice the diagram to the right, I am changing all of my paragraph selectors to have a font family that is Baskerville, a color, and a font size. After I add in my font size, the dimensions for my sections will probably be altered and I will have to restyle them. However, I will not do this until I have styled all of the selectors on the website. Otherwise, I will just be repeating and changing the dimensions constantly, so I'm going to wait until I'm done with all of my styling. All right, setting up the property and value in the body section for our paragraph tags. I want my first paragraph inside the div 2 and the div 4 tags to be styled differently than my other paragraphs on the page. To do this, I will use a paragraph class selector. So first, I will set up the class value name inside the paragraph tag within the body section inside my div 2, div 4. So if you look at the diagram on the left, you're going to see that both of my paragraphs within my div 2 and div 4 have a class selector included in it. The class selector value name will be 24. Largely, it stands for paragraph 2 and 4. Then I will go into my style tag in the head section, and I'm going to look for my last paragraph selector. And then underneath that paragraph selector, I am going to create my class selector that will target my paragraphs in 2 and 4. So if you look at the diagrams to the right, notice that I have my dot par 24, which is my class selector for my paragraph. I included a font family and a color, and it is targeting the class par 24 selector in my paragraph tags. When I run this website, I now should have a blue paragraph and 2 yellow paragraphs. The example to the left, you're going to see that I have a blue paragraph and 2 yellow paragraphs. Note, since I made the paragraph sizes larger, you can't quite see it on the page, but largely my text has extended outside of the container tag. I need to fix this with dimensions, but I will do that later after I have completed my styling. Styling the quote selector. In my second paragraph, I have a quote HTML tag. I need to add CSS3 styling to that quote tag. Since I only have one quote tag that I have to deal with, I can use a regular Q selector for styling. If you look on the right side of the diagram, notice that I have the Q selector, and I have added font family, color, font size, style, and font size. So when you look at the diagram on the left, you're going to see that the quote now has changed sizes, it has changed colors, and it is italic, so it stands more out on the page. Block quote selector. The next step is to add CSS3 styling to the block quote HTML tag. Since I only have one block quote, I don't have to worry about doing a class selector or an ID selector. I can use a regular block quote selector. So following my Q selector in the style section of the head tag, I am going to create my styling for my block quote. Notice I have the font family, I did a font size, a color. I also used the font variant small caps, and I wanted to justify this to make it kind of look like a solid block. When I run it, you're going to see that it is in white font, and it has justified, and it has small caps. Setting up our heading class selectors. I want all of my heading styles to be the same. I could use the regular H2, H3, H4 selectors. However, I want the H2 in the div ID equals 1 and the div ID equals 2 sections to be styled differently than those that show up in the div 3. First, I'm going to set up my regular H2 selector. After the block quote, I will put in my H2 selector that targets all of my H2 tags. Will have the color, font size, and font variant. Now it's time for me to set up my actual class selectors that will target the div 1 and the div 2 property values in the body tags. First, I will give it a class value name called H2. So if you look at the example on the right, I have a class equals quotation marks H2 inside the H2 tags for both the div1 section and the div2 section. Then I'm going to actually go to the style section in the head area, and I'm going to find the H2 selector, and then I am going to create my class selector for my H2 tags. My class selector starts off with a period H2, and then I added a font family. Notice that Times New Roman has spaces in between each of the words. So in CSS3, I will have to put that in quotation marks. So whenever you have spaces between a font family name, make sure you put it in the quotation marks. I also have font size, font variant, which is small caps, and I added a text shadow. When I created my H2, I added a text shadow. A text shadow just adds shading or kind of like a shadow to your text. When you use a text shadow, you will need to include the pixels and points for the top, bottom, and right and left, and then you would add your color for the shadow. If you look at the diagram below the CSS coding, you're going to see that when I run my website, it has like a little shadow that is deflected in the background of the H2 heading. You can also add a box shadow. A box shadow will add a shadow around the div containers or boxes. You will need to add pixels and the points for the pixels. You'll also need to add the color of the shadow. In the example that's given to you up in the left corner, the pixels work in the same order as margins. It goes top, right, bottom, and left. So if you look at the pixels used, we have a shadow that's going to affect the top and the right side of the box. In the example 2, I also added a border radius that would make the corners of the box more curved. The last selector we will do is our button selector. The first step is to go into the body section and find your HTML button with your JavaScript. We are going to take out the style with its property and values so that all that is left in the button HTML tag is the type and the on-click. Then we need to go up into our style tag up in the head section, and we are going to add a button selector. You're going to find your header selector and your H1 selector. After the H1 selector, you're going to add your button selector. In this case, I added the font family, font size, background color, and because I wanted to get it more centered on the page, I added a left margin. Now, the reason why the button tag follows the H1 is because the H1 and the button are all located inside the header section. So we want to group them together so it's easy to find. All right, we have now put in all of our selectors that we need for our website, or I have, and I kind of have a mess in my div section. If you can look at this example, you can see that my container, that blue container, is too small now, that my text overflows over the top of it into my footer. So I'm going to have to go in and make some adjustments wherever it's necessary. So I will start with my div section container, and I will try to do some adjustments there to get everything to fit properly. If you find that this is normal when you have overlaps like this, when you're done with all the styling, you just need to go back and do some adjustments to your dimensions in your div tags and your div container. Once you're done, make sure you run your website in another browser. Both of these should look identical. If you look at the one on the left, that is in Chrome, and the final look on the one on the right has been run in Internet Explorer. They pretty much look the same. Congratulations, you have just finished 3-5. Make sure you have picked up your Chapter 3 HTML codes from the working table. If you have not done so as of yet, go back to your Chapter 3 index.html document in Notepad++. You're going to add the following into your web page. You want paragraph selectors and a paragraph class selectors. You want block quote selector, quote selector, heading selectors and class heading selectors, button selector. You want to adjust your dimensions so that your website looks professional. And then show me your final work when you have finished. Congratulations, you have just finished Chapter 3 activities. Please go back to the class website and see what your next step is.